Your brain runs on glucose. So when it's on that roller coaster, you're on the roller coaster. So that's why you're going to get that energy and mood problem because of the blood sugar ripple effect.
You've just tuned in to Rebel Wellness. I'm your host, Kaylee, also known as Coach Kales, integrative clinical nutritionist in training, fitness pro of over a decade, and the woman who refused to accept normal when my body was screaming otherwise. If you're the high achiever who's been told your blood work is perfect while you're secretly Googling why you feel like garbage, if you're crushing it at work but your energy crashes at 3 p.m. and your cycle just feels off, or maybe you've been gaslit by providers who dismiss your symptoms as just stress, and you know something deeper is going on. You're my people. Here's where functional medicine meets real talk strategy. I created this podcast as your resource to take back the driver's seat on your health journey. Women are incredibly intuitive, and I'm here to help you reconnect with that voice. This isn't about perfection or another protocol to fail at. It's about finally getting the answers your body has been begging for and the tools that actually work in your real, messy, beautiful life. Less noise, more nourishment. Let's dive in. What's up, Rebels? So today's episode was inspired by a conversation I was having with one of my past clients. We were just catching up, and it reminded me of this concept because we were discussing some of the nuances to dieting that I think a lot of us really should understand or at least know about, because it makes a huge difference, especially as the science starts to grow in the gut microbiome world. So I wanted to share with you guys today this whole topic because it's really fascinating. So have you ever had that situation where you've tried a diet that your friend did? Maybe it was Weight Watchers, keto, paleo, carnivore, vegan, and nothing worked for you the way that it worked for your friend. And you may have followed it to a T, ate exactly what they ate or close enough, or maybe you ate better than how your friend did. And you're catching up with her and you're like, hey, I'm not losing the weight that you're losing, or I'm not feeling less brain fog or anything. In fact, I'm feeling worse. Or, a whole variety of symptoms might be completely different for you. And so today we're going to talk about why that happens and what can be really the reason you don't respond the same as your friend might, or even your family member. When it comes to your gut biome, there's stronger chances of you having a closer or more similar biome to somebody else in your family versus your friend. And that's why it's so important to think about that before you judge yourself on whether or not you're failing or something's wrong with you, or you're just not doing enough when you don't have the same results from following a certain diet or eating style as maybe one of your friends did. So in today's episode, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about what nuance to the microbiome can really impact whether or not you respond well to certain eating styles and diets, and what you can really look at for yourself to kind of determine, like, hey, somebody's telling me this diet that's been a game changer for them. When I look at how my body's personally responded to certain things, will it be good for me too? Like, is that something that I should even bother? Or should I just be like, that's great for you, I'm going to continue doing whatever I'm doing? Because that's something that I even personally have had to work with, especially recently I shared with you guys my experience doing the carnivore diet. And it is something that is not for everyone for similar reasons or exact reasons, like we're talking about today about the gut microbiome and how your landscape or your environment rather in your gut microbiome can really play a role on how you respond to certain diets, eating styles, etc. And we're going to mainly be focusing on specific, eating styles and diets in pertaining to, like, if you are trying to get certain health benefits, namely mostly fat loss or weight loss, whatever you specifically are trying to go on a diet for. That's typically what we see people, go into diets on. And let's just be real. Most, throughout my career, people will say, like, hey, I just want to try this diet for these health benefits. But in reality, they really want the weight loss, because weight loss is always like some component that inspired them. You know what I mean? Sometimes people will follow certain diets for other things. And there's definitely nothing wrong with following certain diets for I guess, what society would call superficial reasons or more external reasons. But I do encourage you, it's very much my brand, to remind you that it's absolutely also more important to focus on your own health and what your diet is doing for you, because the only diet that ever works is the diet that you can consistently follow, right? I think that there's a lot of restrictive labeling that we have to kind of break out of. But if we're talking about like nourishing whole food based diets, that would be the 75% or the 80% or the 90%, depending on your goals. And then that 25 to 10% or so is meant to be enjoyable, kind of, comfort foods that are a little bit more gluttonous or things like that. But what you're going to walk away from this episode with is a better understanding of how your individual gut biome plays a huge role in how you're going to respond to certain eating styles, including diets. And this is super important so that you can better understand and learn your individual body and cater to it, because that's how you're going to get off the yo-yo of all the back and forth different dieting, gaining and losing weight constantly, all that kind of stuff, and actually nourishing your body and taking care of it in a way that it needs, unique to you. Okay? So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. And also, just a quick little shout out, come join us on our community. Go to the show notes. There's some quick links there. You can follow us on Instagram. The brand new launch of the next chapter of my business, Nourish Within, is going to be coming in January. If you have heard this episode after January 2026, then it is already live. You can go check out my website. And if you want any of my resources or see if you want to work with me, that is going to be the best place for you to find me there. But without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Okay, so everybody has heard of glucose goddess at this point now. If you have not, I'm sure you've heard about CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, or just monitoring blood sugar spikes in general. If you haven't heard of any of that, congratulations. You have not been on the other side of health gram or health talk or any of the social media guru places, the places where you can get attacked by the health gurus. But we have to talk about blood sugar to start off this episode, because blood sugar responses do play a huge role in your body's response to, inflammation, mood, energy, fat loss, fat gain, etc. So we kind of want to think of blood sugar regulation like the puppet master behind all of these symptoms that I just kind of listed and some more. So let me talk a little bit about some symptoms that are actually blood sugar related. Okay. So energy and mood, blood sugar spikes, and then energy crashes 1 to 2 hours later. Sometimes we experience this as moodiness or hangry. Like sometimes you might just get so hungry, like such low blood sugar that your body is like, I could punch anything right now that got in the way of me and my next meal. Or you might reach for a ton of junk food because you're just like, I just need something, the whole Snickers, you're not yourself when you're hungry kind of thing. That is specifically due to blood sugar roller coaster. You actually can live a life where you don't get that. That is not actually just like normal. Okay. That's a common symptom that happens, especially in nowadays, how we eat and how we're so stressed and busy all the time. But it isn't something, it's a natural way that your body is giving you feedback that the blood sugar is getting to a point where it is too low. And it's also a feedback that you have been having maybe too many spikes of too high blood sugar and then it crashing too much. It all plays in together, really, when it comes to the blood sugar roller coaster. And those things, even though your body is doing something that it's supposed to, responding to what you give it, it actually shouldn't be so aggressive. Like that spike shouldn't just shoot up. Something that might shoot up for majority of people is if they had like a pixie stick or some sort of candy that is just straight sugar. And then your blood sugar is going to respond to try to bring that sugar down. It's going to spike up because it gets into your bloodstream. And then your body produces insulin to try to manage that and bring it back down. And if you are somebody who's eating just a straight carby thing, like a bagel for breakfast, and then you go about your whole day, you didn't eat anything else that had any protein or fat. So those like blood sugar spikes are going to spike and then crash, because having a well-rounded meal, like I've talked about before in other podcasts, is so important for managing your blood sugar, because it helps, your blood sugar is going to naturally spike anytime you give it food, especially if it's involving carbs, because it's glucose. And then your body is going to work with the protein and fats to digest more slower and also manage that blood glucose response. So then you basically will eat a well-rounded meal 2 or 3 to 4 times a day, and then your body is pretty much stable all day long. And I see this with my type 1 diabetic clients, where we've adjusted their meals and they've followed eating a well-rounded meal with enough calories and a good ratio of protein, carbs, and fats. And their blood sugar stays relatively stable all day long. They don't have to give themselves more insulin for anything. And then when they go back to eating kind of like, I would say a standard American pattern of eating nowadays, where sometimes it's a disjointed meal, again, like a bagel and cream cheese, and then like maybe some sort of salad with a protein with a really fatty dressing, and then, something heavier and high in carbs and fat at night with some protein. Usually you're going to see a blood sugar roller coaster with that. A lot of people actually don't eat enough protein at all, and they end up basically just running off of carbs and fat all day, which is just going to be a lot of blood sugar roller coaster. So anyways, all to say that it's really important that you understand how your body responds to meals and why macros matter, because they play a huge role in your body's response to the foods you eat, and then how it impacts your energy and your mood. So if you are getting like a afternoon slump where you feel like you just need some sugar or something to bump you back up, or caffeine, that's a common one, is caffeine. That is definitely your glucose nosediving, that you need something, and that you're likely, myself personally, I look at my lunch. I'm like, was that enough calories, A, and right macronutrients, B? Was there enough protein? Was there enough healthy fats? And then I look at like, was there enough carbs and whatnot? And the more active you are, the more carbs you need. The less active you are, the more fats you need. Okay, so that's kind of a general thing. Go back to episodes 19 through 21 or 22 if you want to better understand macronutrients, because they're going to be a game changer for better understanding the food you eat and composing food more easily. A lot of people roll their eyes at macronutrients, and like they're totally sleeping on a life hack, because it's not something that is restrictive. And, some people have made macros very crazy and restrictive, like way too much going on. Like I had a friend who did a macros group on Facebook, and they logged every single meal in this giant spreadsheet all day long. And it was the worst way to ever do macros. It does not need to be that complicated and complex. And that will totally scare you away from macronutrients. You don't even have to track your macronutrients, like even on an app, to better understand and get the benefits from macros. If you just understand composing meals with foods that land in certain macronutrient groups, you're going to be far ahead of the game, especially for this blood sugar roller coaster stuff, okay? But your brain runs on glucose. So when it's on that roller coaster, you're on the roller coaster. So that's why you're going to get that energy and mood problem, because of the blood sugar ripple effect. So your hormones, especially. Insulin is the master hormone when it manages your blood sugar, okay? It's the thing that like all these GLP-1 medications is kind of capitalizing on. So when your insulin is chronically elevated, it throws everything else off. So high insulin blocks fat burning. So you're going to end up with that stubborn weight. It messes with ovulation. It worsens your PCOS. It tanks your progesterone potentially, depending on what's going on with your insulin. Okay. And it also can create cortisol chaos, because when your insulin spikes, your body receives that as a stress response. So eating too dysregulated, like too much sugar at different times when you're not balancing it out with more proteins and fats, and stimulating a blood sugar spike, is going to call your body to pull out insulin to manage it. Okay. And, that's why we get insulin resistance, is when your body has been calling on insulin too often for too long, and your cells essentially stop responding to the insulin and it can't communicate anymore. So that's just kind of like a lay term way to describe type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of different factors that play into it, but that is one of the most main, easy to understand ways of describing what happens with insulin resistance. But that's why even if you're not diabetic, your insulin gets stressed by you eating very dysregulated with having a lot of different blood sugar spiking foods and not balancing it with the other nutrients that it prefers to have in every meal to manage that insulin better, okay? So we don't want that to be chronically elevated or dysregulated by your eating and your stress patterns, because that just causes more stress on your body. This also plays in for inflammation and aging. So your chronic blood sugar spikes equals glycation. So literally sugar sticking to proteins. And this also creates what's called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. So wrinkles, joint pain, accelerated aging. Those are all normal side effects that we tend to see with chronic blood sugar spikes in this glycation situation. And of course, that drives systemic inflammation, which is, the root cause of most chronic disease, unfortunately. So another good reason why you want to be able to manage and pay attention to your blood sugar spikes all over, and cravings and hunger. So that kind of goes in with the energy and mood, like I was talking about in the beginning of this, that you get that spike crash cycle that keeps you reaching for more carbs and sugar. And you're not like addicted or lacking willpower. Your blood sugar is just calling the shots because it's super dysregulated. So if you manage your blood sugar, you'll get more stable appetite and better food freedom. But the interesting thing of why we're talking about that in today's episode is that personalized blood sugar responses are not just diabetes prevention, but we're also talking about your energy, mental clarity, hormone balance, weight management, skin health, inflammation control, any of those symptoms that you probably want to stop having. This is a really important conversation today because it's going to help give you the tools to gain stability in your blood sugar, because it's super foundational, okay? So that's why I wanted to kind of first talk about blood sugar, so you better understand what it plays a role in and why this is really important for you to hone in on. Okay, so something really quick too that I wanted to add now that we've discussed blood sugar and why it's important to manage that roller coaster is there was this research that I mentioned in the beginning from the Weizmann Institute that found some really interesting, quote unquote, rule breaking information about how the gut individually plays a role on your response to certain foods. So kind of tying back into how come your gut might not respond to one eating style the same as your friends might, okay? So researchers monitored 800 people continuously for a week, tracking their blood sugar responses to nearly 47,000 meals. So this is a pretty large sample size with a good amount of data. And their data was collected on their gut microbiome, sleep, exercise, stress, and other general anthropometrics. Say that word so weirdly, but okay. The jaw-dropping findings were that many people experience larger blood sugar spikes from bananas than from cookies. Weird, right? Some participants' glucose levels rose sharply after white bread, but not after pure sugar. Universal dietary advice, like the glycemic index, failed to predict individual responses. Super weird. So this kind of turns a lot of generic food advice on its head, and it makes a huge difference for you to better understand your own individual body's response to certain foods than others. But let's start the talk about why the microbiome is kind of a plot twist. Because if you thought that was crazy like I did about how someone can have a response to a banana worse than a cookie, let's talk about the why and what we're learning. I'm sure in like 5 to 10 years, we're going to know even more, which is going to be great, but also, a little bit overwhelming. If you're like me, I feel like the gut biome, like I had a gut biome class this term in my grad program, and it was fascinating and simultaneously super overwhelming. But it plays such a huge role in our health that we really need to understand it better. So I'm glad that you're here listening to this episode, trying to understand it better for yourself. So your gut contains trillions of microbes, bacteria, fungi, even viruses, Even worms. I know that's so gross to hear, but they all play a role, okay? They actually play really essential roles. I almost went off on a tangent about something really fascinating I learned in my class, but I'll save that for another time. But they do play big roles in your weight, anxiety, diabetes, and a lot more. So the biome contains 100 times more genes than the human genome. And that means that it's not just what you eat, it's what your personal ecosystem in there of these little bugs does with it. And each one and how many of those bugs there are determines a lot of what your body does with the food you give it. So it really doesn't matter if you're feeding yourself a ton of really good quality fruits and veggies or something like that. If your body is got a biome to break down and better assimilate nutrients from more animal protein, so to speak. Let's say you're a vegan by choice. You grew up eating a mixed plate diet with animal proteins and whatnot. And then as a early adult, you decided to go vegan, and over time, your health started to go awry. It could be because your gut bugs have been built and are strong at getting most of its nutrients from animal proteins more so than pulling the small amount of iron from the broccoli you gave it and things like that. And so this is why it can play a huge role in whether or not you can actually even maintain health while following a certain eating style or diet. But something really interesting is that lifestyle, not genetics, plays the greatest role in determining your microbiome composition. So this means you have way more control than you think over your gut. So while there's a lot of understanding that, the start of our gut comes from our mother's gut, if we were born cesarean or natural vaginal birth, that plays a role in our biome too. But what happened to you in your life, how you ate in your life, like I was just saying, and then also your stress levels and other components to your lifestyle. Do you smoke? Do you drink a lot? All those things play a huge role in your microbiome composition. And your gut bugs are trainable. They do respond to consistent dietary patterns. So if you've ever followed something for a while that is completely different, like ketogenic diet, for example, if you even follow a ketogenic diet for 4 to 6 weeks, you are going to impact your gut biome composition because your body is going to respond in real time to what you're giving it consistently for weeks at a time, months at a time. You probably won't change your biome a whole ton in 1 week, but everything from that time, as you start to build consistency, your biome's going to respond because it wants to keep you alive, and or a lot of those bugs just want to also stay alive. So they might adjust, and usually do adjust because of what you're eating. So if you've ever felt a significant change to either, your scent, if you know what I mean, or even your stool, if you've taken a look at your BMs when you've went from, a mixed plate diet to keto or to vegan or, even carnivore or any of these more obvious adjusting diets, or even paleo, honestly, a lot of people will see it when you change your diet entirely and you remove certain food groups and what have you. So with all of that said, this is kind of that moment where if you ever felt like because your friend had such great results on keto or something like that and you didn't, this is probably because of your gut biome compared to theirs. And the advice you got, maybe it wasn't following something that was built for you. It was just built for the general public. And I see this all the time. There's a ton of people that will make these radical diets trying to become a fad or whatnot because, it's like the Atkins guy. Like when you can package and sell something, and especially under the guise of like losing all this weight and feeling great, people are going to just shove their money at you. And anybody can make any diet and say it does this amazing thing because it's what it did for me. It's like bodybuilders. Almost always does some bodybuilder chick, and this is like no hate, this is just something that I've always observed and thought it was a little bit funny. They will diet down, eat the tilapia, rice, broccoli, all that stuff, get really lean, and then show off their body to a bunch of their friends and family, and then decide that they are qualified to tell you how to lose weight and look like them because they did it and what they ate. So then you've got, oh, okay, your friend's mom, or, a babysitter, or the coworker, and they're all like, I want to look like you. You looked great, even though bodybuilding competition body is really unhealthy when it comes down to that body fat percentage and the way that they ate. Unsustainable. You never see them sustain that naturally. But that's just a side note. And then they basically will say like, oh yeah, just eat exactly what I ate for a bodybuilding competition. But like that person following it is not going to eat that way for any reason because they're not getting on stage. So they're not motivated the same way. And so then they eat like that for a while, and sure, maybe they'll lose some weight because really what they're doing is just making food under the caloric needs. So in a caloric deficit rather, and then also really plain and quote unquote clean. So like whole foods. And so of course you're going to see some weight loss, but you're not going to look like the person who was training for the bodybuilding competition because they were also training and following a specific program and also motivated because they're getting on stage like pretty much butt naked. And so you see this pattern. Like, have you seen this pattern? Like when I'm talking about it, are you like, yeah, I've totally seen somebody who did that. Like you had that friend from high school who went into competing like in the late 2010s when it's been super popular, and they just dieted down, got on stage, and then finished the competition, or maybe did a few and then decided to start being a personal trainer who also helps you get into bodybuilding shape. Yeah. Anyways, that's such a pattern. And again, no hate. It's just really funny because, it's this weird pattern that I have always seen. But there's always the person who follows them, is not going to do a bodybuilding competition, just wants to look as lean as the person who did the competition. They try to follow this diet and it doesn't work for them for a variety of reasons. But a lot of it can also be because their body and their biome is just not responsive the same way that this other person's was. So I digress from that tangent, but it's an example that I think a lot of us can relate to because I think we've all had that person in our life that we've observed. Maybe you've even hired them and it didn't work for you. So kind of coming back to the interesting side of why your biome might not respond the same as somebody else's is that there's a lot to be said about learning exactly what your body needs and how it's going to respond. So let's take a couple of seconds to talk about some key mechanisms that you might be wondering, what should I better understand about my own gut so that I can have more control over my body responding well to certain diets and modifying your current diet to be more supportive of your metabolic goals. So fiber fermentation and short chain fatty acids, SCFAS. That's the abbreviation you may have heard before. Certain gut bacteria like Akkermansia, that's a really buzzy one that is being talked about and researched a lot more, and Faecalibacterium. Some of the names in the bacterial world, guys, are insane. I'm just going to say that. But they ferment dietary fiber into SCFAS, especially butyrate, acetate, and propionate. SCFAS improve insulin sensitivity, they reduce inflammation, and they help regulate appetite hormones like GLP-1. Fun fact. You can actually stimulate GLP-1 naturally in your own body. You can just do a quick Google and they will probably share a list for you that you can reference if you want to increase that naturally in your body without using the medication. People with more diverse fiber fermenting microbes actually have more blood sugar responses that are stable. So this is where that could be really important to focus on supporting your Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium naturally. So sorry if I am pronouncing that second one wrong. It's just, like I said, it's a hard world in the biome world. I don't know how those people do it with the PhDs in biome. So gut barrier and inflammation connection is also important. So some bacterial strains strengthen your gut lining and others degrade it. So a compromised gut barrier allows bacterial fragments like lipopolysaccharides to leak into circulation. So we don't want to see things like leaky gut because that'll trigger low-grade inflammation, which can create insulin resistance as well. So inflammation equals your cells stop listening to insulin, where insulin says, hey, let glucose in, and it doesn't. Again, that would be called insulin resistance. It's not listening to the insulin. So This is why when two people eat the same exact meal, one person's blood sugar stays stable while the other spikes. So if your gut lining is compromised because you have more inflammatory bacterial strains, maybe from chronic stress, antibiotic use in the past, or a low fiber diet, you're essentially walking around with like a smoldering fire that makes every meal harder for your body to process and also makes it harder for you to then absorb essential nutrients. So sometimes we see the fallout from your body not absorbing the nutrients it needs to produce healthy hair or make nice skin and nails. Those things are also symptoms that kind of come down the stream from inflammation in your gut for too long. So that's why it's really important to kind of also pay attention to the inflammation in your gut barrier. Now, one of the fascinating ones is the bacterial enzymes and carbohydrate digestion. So, something that I'm going to tell you a little trick of how you can understand if you're somebody whose biome might have better digesting carbohydrate bacteria or not. But what's happening basically when different bacterial species have different enzymatic toolkits, some microbes break down complex carbs rapidly. So glucose gets released quickly, and others do it slowly. So more of a gradual glucose release. And your personal microbiome is going to determine that digestion speed. So the little tip is if you are somebody who eats a carby meal and gets sleepy, so you're digesting very slowly, so kind of a gradual glucose release, you're probably somebody who has a microbiome that actually isn't geared well for turning carbohydrates into fuel. And if you're on the opposite, somebody who eats a simple carby meal like some white rice or some pasta or something like that, and you get energized, you're somebody whose biome is built to break down carbohydrates faster than the other person. So that's an easy way to figure out how you should eat. Some people refer this to like carb tolerance or carb intolerant. Essentially, your biome plays a big role in that, which one you are, really. So if you are somebody who always gets sleepy after a giant carby meal, then you're probably somebody who should focus their meals more around, water-soluble fibers like vegetables and things like that, and good proteins and good fats. So you could be somebody who responds well to more of a paleo, carnivore, keto style diet. On the opposite end, if you're more like me and you respond very well to carbs and you get energized by carbs, I get so energized by just white rice. So for me, I actually need more of a mixed plate diet that does involve a good amount of carbs and actually lower fats, not crazy low fats. Females, we need healthy fats at an ample amount, usually no less than like 40 grams a day for proper thyroid health, hair, skin, eye, all that kind of stuff is really important. That only can come from healthy fats, brain cells, cholesterol. We need lipids to create hormones and things like that. So you don't want to eat a crazy low-fat diet. That the low-fat diet has been one of the most detrimental things to females' health. They're pointing towards a lot of that early onset Alzheimer's that a lot of women have been experiencing the last couple decades. They are thinking it can be a lot more correlated to following a low-fat diet their entire life, unfortunately. So we need healthy fats, but how much you need is definitely dependent on your body. And in this response or in this specific situation, it can be related more to how you respond to carbs because, again, like I didn't realize I'd be referencing my macronutrient episodes so much this episode, but I talk a lot about how you inverse your carbs and fats and you always keep your proteins generally consistent in your day-to-day eating because, and you can customize it then based on, do you think you have more positively digesting carbohydrate bugs in your biome or not? So little life hack there that ties into macronutrients. But another component is your bile acid metabolism. So gut bacteria modifies your bile acids, which help to digest fats. And modified bile acids act as signaling molecules that influence glucose metabolism. So certain bacterial strains can improve how your body regulates blood sugar through those bile acid pathways. So basically your gut bugs actually recycle and modify bile acids, which then go on to affect how your body processes both fat and sugar. So it's this kind of beautiful or chaotic feedback loop where your microbiome is literally reshaping your metabolic messengers. So your bile acid metabolism is really important in this context. So there's also some interesting aspects to this discussion on the Prevotella versus Bacteroides divide. So different people are dominated by different bacterial families. So Prevotella dominant folks tend to respond better to high fiber and complex carbs, similar to like what I was talking about. And the Bacteroides dominant folks may handle animal proteins and fats better. So this is where you might be that person who responded really well to keto or carnivore or something like that. And then another person could be more Prevotella dominant and not respond well to those diets at all, but respond really well to like a high fiber, like vegan or paleo or something like that. Okay. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that this kind of brings it home that you can better understand what your individual body is and how it's going to respond to certain diets based off of how your body has felt when you've tried some of these other diets. And honestly, that's really important to think about and reflect on for yourself, because you really don't want to put your body under the stress of following a diet that it just isn't responding well to because of your bacterial makeup. And you eating a certain way constantly can harm you more than help you, because you can't just force your biome to shift and change into, a Bacteroides dominant type versus a Prevotella dominant type. And then we're also learning and understanding that there's a lot of other components that play into it too. So while you can influence your biome and its makeup when it comes to, like butyrate producing or akkermansia and all that, you really can't change the makeup of your dominant bacteria species, because it's part of your makeup. And that's something too that can become, bad for people who are constantly eating one way and their body just doesn't respond to that. So, I've known people who have just chronically stuck to a vegan diet and their health is not good. And it's not happy, and it hasn't been for years, and chronically, declining, and they are just very tied to whatever their why is for being a vegan. And that's all fine. But you do have to understand that there is some responsibility around, okay, well, if your health is failing, you have to look at perhaps there's a way to incorporate some more responsible, sustainable animal products that can provide your body with the nutrients it's trying to get, because it's not liking constantly only eating a ton of fiber and plant-based nutrition, essentially. And a lot of people don't even absorb nutrients from supplements. A lot of people think like, oh, well, I'm taking iron supplements, so I don't need hemi-iron from animal proteins and whatever. This is usually a huge mistake for a lot of females. This is why I don't usually see females they don't thrive longer than 5 years or so on a fully vegan diet. And a lot of times too, like when I've had some people get blood work done, they like refuse to show it to me because they know that it's not that good. And so this is something where I really encourage a lot of people who do follow certain diets and they're not feeling their best, especially after years of following a diet. Your hair is falling out, your skin doesn't look so great, your nails are brittle, your energy is low, or your mood is low. A lot of people have noticed, especially like with vegan diets, even with other restrictive diets like carnivore, when you remove other food groups too much and your body doesn't like that, you can experience things like anxiety and depression. Those are one of those ways that your body gives you a feedback to, hey, like this isn't for me. This isn't going so good. Can we not do this anymore? So listen to it. So I want to close out today's episode with just reminding you guys that hopefully you learned some interesting things today about the biome and why certain diets may not work for you as others might. But really tune in and listen to your body and learn more about what you individually respond well to. And that's going to make the trajectory of your health and your vitality so much better. And on top of that, I'd really encourage you to get confident in just letting your friends or your family members do whatever they want, but you don't have to join them. Like, I know there's that thing where it's really fun to kind of like join a friend or whatnot, following some crazy diet. And then, you can really screw up your health and alter things in a way that are going to take months to fix, or sometimes can completely put on more weight in the long run for you than it did your friend or something like that. And it's just not worth it. Okay. So pay attention and just choose the eating style that you feel best in and that works for you. And if you need some help on better understanding what to eat, again, I have so many resources. There's a lot of people that have some great resources online for you to better understand things. Like I had said, I'll actually link the macronutrient episodes for you in the show notes. So if you want to pop over to those, learn more about proteins or carbs or fats, they're great episodes. They are our top performing ones still to this day. And they're going to really help you better understand why it's important to know what you're eating and, more often than not, choose meals that support your blood sugar, like we were talking about a ton in today's episode. All right, Rebel, that's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something new about your gut and that you feel a little bit more confident about taking care of yourself and taking care of your gut and learning it, because that's going to be such a game changer for you in your future. I know it has been for me, especially this year when I've really honed in, taken better care of it with better supplements, better routines, better meals, Papa John's. Just kidding. Hopefully for those of you in the US, you understand that reference. But as always, celebrate your strength and nourishment, walk with confidence, and I will catch you on another episode of Rebel Wellness. All right, Rebel, that's another episode in the books. If you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this actually makes sense now, do me a favor, screenshot this episode, tag me at Kaylee Loren or at Rebel Wellness Podcast on Instagram, and tell me which piece hit different. Your aha moments literally make my entire week. Want more of this energy? Jump on my newsletter where I spill the tea on everything from blood work interpretation to why your cravings aren't a character flaw. It's the unfiltered stuff that would make this episode 3 hours long. So if you want more of that, join our newsletter on my website, coachkales.com. And listen, if this show is becoming your weekly dose of someone finally gets it, please smash that 5-star rating on Spotify, or please drop us a review on Apple Podcast. It helps us grow and expand and share more education with more women like you who need it. It's really important that we support our sisters. Real talk though, disclaimer time, I'm dropping knowledge, not prescriptions. Everything here is educational. I'm not diagnosing, treating, or replacing your healthcare team. Think of me as your research-obsessed bestie who happens to know a lot more about hormones, gut health, and all the good stuff than your hairdresser or that random health guru that you're not quite sure if you should trust her background. Keep questioning the status quo, keep trusting your body's wisdom, and keep showing up for yourself. You're doing better than you think, and I'll be right here cheering you on. Catch you next week.